baptism, and Savannah is singing, and Garrett and Hannah are out of town, and so we get a lot of.
Elizabeth had a baby.
And Elizabeth had a baby, that's right. All right, well let's get started. We're walking through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, and today we're coming up on what I think is one of the most ignored parts of the Sermon on the Mount. It's probably the part of the Sermon on the Mount where you are most likely to say, that can't really be what he means there. So let me ask you this. Let's start with this, and we'll be in verse 38 through 42. Is a Christian allowed to defend himself against an attack?
Yes. I mean, I get yes, but don't try to argue or try to, make it bigger, kind of.
Okay.
Physical attack?
Yeah.
Oh, like fighting?
Uh-huh.
Oh. I mean, I guess defending, yeah, but
Okay.
if you can see the need to like walk away, just try to do that,
Okay. So the passage we're going to look at this morning may at first give the impression that a Christian is not allowed to defend himself against an attack. And some extreme interpretations of pacifism might interpret it that way. That's not what this passage exactly means, though, but it does mean something pretty radical, okay? We live in a society where who wins is like of utmost importance, and what we're going to find in the Sermon on the Mount this morning is that who wins is not really all that important when it comes to stuff like this. What really matters is that ultimately God wins. And so because that's true, it does not matter if you win a particular battle over something, okay? So I want us to look at what Jesus has to say about our attitude toward retaliation today, and that's what we see here in Matthew chapter 5. So Hunter, why don't you read verses 38 through 41 of Matthew 5 for me?
You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. On the contrary, if anyone slaps you on your right cheek, turn to the other to him also. As for the one who wants to sue you and take away your shirt, let him have your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him too.
Okay, so this is the fifth of Jesus' six antitheses that we find here in the Sermon on the Mount, okay? So remember, each of those begins with the you have heard this, but I say unto you this, okay? And so we've looked at 4 of those already. When he talked about you've heard don't murder, but I tell you, if you get angry with your brother, you've committed murder in your heart. He says, you've heard don't commit adultery, but I tell you, if you look lustfully at another woman, you've already done that. You've heard to write a certificate of divorce, but I tell you, just don't get divorced. And last week he said, you've heard about keeping oaths, but I tell you, just to let your yes be yes and your no be no. And so he gets to this antitheses, and in each of these, what he's saying is there is a kernel of truth in what you've heard and what you've read. It's not that those things are untrue. What it is that it's possible to keep the letter of the law and miss the spirit of the law. And so that's what we see once again in this point here. So he says here, you have heard something. And what is that he says that you have heard?
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Okay, so where does that come from? Where does that principle come from? Where do we hear that? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is not a trick question. It's in the Old Testament, okay? As a matter of fact, it's in the Old Testament several times. We find it in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Somebody turn over to Exodus chapter 21 for me real quick. First one gets there. Read verses 24 and 25 for me.
On what chapter?
21, Exodus 21.
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, bruise for bruise, wound for wound.
Okay, so this is part of the Old Testament that deals with how the Jewish courts were supposed to deal with offenses against people. And so in much the same way that divorce certificates, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, were a protection for women in marriage, this rule is a protection against unfair and over punishment. Okay? So when you hear eye for eye, what do you think? What does that make you think when you hear eye for eye and tooth for tooth?
I guess my
Yeah, yeah. You get me, what am I going to do? I'm going to get you back, okay? It's this idea of retaliation. But that's not really what's happening here, okay? What the whole point of the Old Testament law was, in most laws before that, it was not eye for eye. It was 2 eyes for an eye. It was 2 teeth for a tooth. It was your life for an eye, okay? And so what this law does is it prevents people from being given over or unfairly harsh punishments for offenses that weren't as serious, okay? And this principle is good as far as it goes in its proper context. Today, we ought to hope for and pray for a justice system that does not over-punish people, okay? Our court systems don't seek vengeance, they seek a punishment that fits a crime. And that's what this Old Testament principle was all about. Sometimes I think we as Christians think we have to be as harsh as possible on people who have committed crimes. But that's not what the Bible talks about. The Bible talks about a justice that fits the crime. And that's what the Old Testament, when you hear an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that's what the Old Testament is talking about, okay? And so what we find just as in our day is that people took this right principle and took it further than it was ever supposed to go, okay? So this right principle was that justice should fit. Okay, there shouldn't be over punishment. It should fit what actually happened. Okay, but what is the danger of taking this system, this idea that was meant for the justice system, and applying it to your personal life and saying, if somebody wrongs me, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? What is the danger there?
No good, better than they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm not going to be any better than they are. I'm going to do exactly what they do. What else? If everybody's eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, where's everybody going to end up?
The hospital.
Yeah, that's right. Blind and toothless. I mean, this is the idea is what happens inevitably, and this is what Jesus is getting at here, okay? What happens inevitably is that we get into this cycle of retaliation where we're constantly fighting against one another, and you do this to me and I do this to you, and I do this to you, and we do it back and forth, and we live in this society that always wants blood. We want to tear people down. We want to destroy people. You wrong me, I'm going to wrong you, and we're going to protect ourselves at all costs. If someone gets 10 years in prison for a crime, we think they deserve 20 years. If someone has $1 million for a bond for a crime, we say, why don't they have a $10 million bond for a crime? And so this cycle just repeats itself, and every repetition of the cycle, it gets bigger and worse. And so retaliation, again and again, we see the retaliation just get worse. And so this is the issue that Jesus is dealing with. The people of their time had taken this principle that was meant for the justice system, and that principle was the punishment should fit the crime. And they'd taken that principle and they turned it into, you mess with me, you're going to get it back from me, okay? You're going to get retaliated against. And so just as he has done in all these other antitheses, Jesus is saying is the way they've been using these Old Testament commands is a way they were never intended to do. The heart behind the eye for the eye command is that it is a limiting principle, not a command to do something. It's supposed to be limiting, that we don't go overboard with our punishments for crime, but they've been using it as a permission to take out their pound of flesh against someone who hurt them, okay? Do you see the difference there? One is trying to limit how we do things, and the other is like see it as an opportunity, okay? And so that's what's going on here. And so Jesus begins to lay out the actual way that this command ought to be understood. And he gives 4 examples in this. And the basic idea here is that eye for an eye command is meant for legal situations, and the point was to limit vengeance. not to give you permission to exact vengeance. And then he says, here is the way you ought to deal with attacks in your personal life. Okay? And so the first is probably the most famous. What does he say? Instead of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, what does he say in verse 39?
Resist the evil, the one who is evil.
Yeah, do not resist the one who is evil. And if anyone does what?
Slaps you.
Slaps you on the right cheek, what should you do?
Slap him back.
What does he say you should do? Not what do you want to do?
Turn to him the other also.
Turn to him the other also. Turn the other cheek, okay? So, what do you think Jesus means by this?
It means even if somebody wrongs you, you should forgive them and let it go.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? So first of all, let me say this. This is probably not intended to be seen as a physical attack here. Y'all ever remember, did y'all watch Bugs Bunny growing up? Y'all remember when he took his glove off and he would slap somebody across the face with it? That wasn't a physical attack, it was an insult, is what the intention of it was. It was you're an idiot or something like that. It was this idea of an insult. And so probably what we're talking about is an insult here. And so the application here is how we react when we're insulted or when someone says something against us. And this really gets to the heart of how we respond to criticism, okay? This is important. What is your fleshly auto response to somebody when they insult or criticize you?
Back at him.
Insult them back, go into self-defense mode, okay? And so this is a warning by Jesus against that. When you're insulted, he says, don't go into self-defense mode automatically. And this should be fundamental to us understanding what Jesus is saying here, okay? The gospel frees us from needing to defend ourselves against attacks, okay? Here's what the gospel tells you. You are worse than even your worst critics think you are. That's what Charles Spurgeon said. He said, when someone speaks ill of you, don't think poorly of them. You're much worse than they actually think. Okay? By our very nature, we are desperately wicked sinners. And so when somebody insults us, whether it's true or not, there's a grain of truth because we messed up. We're all messed up. But here's what the gospel also tells us. Not just that you're worse than even your worst critics and insulters believe you to be, but you're loved and accepted by God anyway. And because of what he has done for you, he loves you. And so you don't have to spend your time defending yourself against insult and criticism, even if it's unfair. You can turn the other cheek because the approval of others is not what you need. All that really matters is the approval of God. And that's what he's getting at here, okay? So you can turn that other cheek because you don't really need their approval. The Lord approves of you despite how bad you are. Okay? And so you can trust that. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't listen to criticism. Sometimes even the worst insult may have a little truth to it. What it means, though, is we don't have to spend our time trying to get back and defend ourselves against insult. Because number one, it's not likely to do anything except escalate matters. And number two, we don't have to seek our approval in other people. And so this is the first thing that I want you to see. We don't have to worry about defending ourselves. Self-defense is not something from attacks like these, from insults. It's not something we have to worry about. Now, here's the second example. That's verse 40. What does he say?
And if anyone sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well.
Okay, so this is another command that we need to understand in this first century Jewish context. There's a lawsuit or a disagreement over property or something like that, and in a case like this, a person might be required to use their tunic, which was kind of an inner garment, as collateral. The outer garment was the cloak, and it was more expensive, generally speaking, and the person wouldn't be forced to give up their cloak in a situation like this. So what you're doing when they sue you and you give them your tunic is it's like a collateral payment to cover things. And so what do you think Jesus' point is here then when he says give them your cloak also? If the law requires you to give them your tunic, What is he telling you to do?
More.
Yeah, to go above and beyond what the law requires. This is a really simple point. The way to respond to someone who wants to wrong you is by doing for them more than they even ask. That's what he's getting at here, okay? Why do you think he says that? Why is he calling us to go above and beyond here?
He wants us to be willing to give of our time and our hearts.
Yeah, this whole sermon is about not just obeying the letter of the law. It's about having hearts that are turned toward God, okay? And a person whose heart is turned toward God is the kind of person who's going to want to go above and beyond in dealing. Yeah, that's right. We're set apart. We ought to look different than the rest of the world. And so this is a great example of this. And then it takes us to the third example. He says, if anyone forces you to go a mile, go to 2 miles with them. You probably heard that statement before also, okay? So again, this has to be understood in its context. Roman law allowed a Roman soldier to like force a regular person to help them carry their armor for 1 mile. Okay, that was it. If a Roman soldier wanted you to carry their armor for 1 mile, you had to carry it for 1 mile, but that was all you had to do. So imagine how people probably felt about Roman soldiers forcing them to do something like this. What do you think their feelings for those soldiers would be?
Bully.
Yeah, they'd see them as bullies. If they had to do that, because if you go in a mile with them, then you got to turn around and come home. What does that mean? You've had to walk
2 miles.
2 miles, and half of that you're carrying all this heavy equipment with you. So how do you think that people probably felt about those Roman soldiers?
Not very good.
Yeah, it's not, they were probably not exalted the way we often exalt soldiers in our day, and frankly, rightly so in many ways. But they probably had a great deal of resentment toward these soldiers for forcing them to do this, okay? It took a lot of time out of their day. And so what is Jesus saying here about those situations where we might be tempted to feel resentful about being put in situations by people who are in authority over us? What is he saying we ought to do?
Again, go above and beyond.
Yeah, it's going beyond the bare minimum. This may not necessarily mean going the extra mile literally. It may mean doing something with a smile on your face rather than a scowl on your face, okay? Look for those situations in your life where you're tempted to respond with anger and resentfulness, and instead see them as an opportunity to serve God. What do you think a Roman soldier who has forced someone to go a mile carrying their armor, when they get to that end of the mile, would think if the other person said, you know something, let's go 1 more, I'm fine? What do you think that the Roman soldier, how would he respond to that?
Disbelief.
Yeah, disbelief, shock. Might want to know, why in the world are you doing this? I guarantee it's probably the first time it's ever happened, right? Why would you do this for me? And what does that open up a door for?
Conversation.
Yeah, conversation about, this is why, because I follow this man named Jesus, okay? And he has taught me to do this. And so all of these are places where our Christian character begins to show, where we can work to build our character. And the point of everything in this sermon is that as people who are in the kingdom of God, we are working to be the kinds of people who will fit in when the kingdom of God comes in its fullness. And the way we do this is by pursuing virtue and building our character. And the way we do that is by these small choices every day that go contrary to our nature. By our nature, we're going to be self-possessed and thinking about number one at all times, okay? What is best for me? And Jesus has told us that if you want to follow him, you have to die to yourself. He's calling you to this kind of radical discipleship. And so by making these kinds of small choices every day that go contrary to our nature, that's how we build the character that he wants from us, okay? And we become more like his nature, all right? So this is the point that he's trying to make for us again and again and again. You come into these situations. How many of y'all have people in your lives who just rub you the wrong way? All of us do, right? Okay? And so the overriding principle in all of these verses that he's talking about is when you get into those situations where you're in those sandpaper situations where they just rub you in a way you don't like, this is an opportunity not for you to respond the way your flesh tells you to respond, but to respond in such a way that is so radically different than the rest of the world that the other person is forced to take notice and see something different about you. And it offers that opportunity for you to have that conversation about what Jesus has done for you. Okay? And this makes a difference, folks. It is radical. This kind of living has turned societies upside down. These are the principles that someone like Martin Luther King Jr. used to completely overturn this system of segregation that was ingrained in our society. Okay, these principles have the ability to just radically change people, radically change people's lives, and so that's what he's calling us to here. Okay, all right. Any questions about that? Anybody want to add anything before we move on to one final verse here? Okay, somebody read verse 42 for me.
Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you.
Okay, so this brings us to a final exhortation, which puts a bow on everything that Jesus has said here. Give to those who beg. Don't refuse someone who borrows from you. What do you think his point is here?
To
Don't be greedy.
continue to be willing.
It's real simple. To give to those who beg from you and not to refuse those who want to borrow from you, okay? A lot of times when we give to a beggar, we fear that they're going to use that money for something they shouldn't use it for. Is that your problem? That's their problem, okay? Maybe we worry if we loan something to somebody else, we'll never get it back. That's not our problem. That's their problem, okay? Now, does Jesus mean give everything a beggar or a borrower asked for? Does that mean we have to continue to give and give and give? Not necessarily. There may be times when we recognize that where we can't give as much as we'd like, or we recognize that situations we discern because we know someone, the best thing to do is to cut them off for their own good. But what he's calling us to here is an attitude that we are seeking to help, not ignore, that we're seeking to go above and beyond. If you remember anything from this lesson today, those three words ought to stick in your head. Above and beyond what is expected of us. That is what he's calling us to do, okay? And so that's the ultimate point that he's making here. So I can think of at least a couple of questions that come up when we try to practically apply these verses, okay? They're concerns that I think people over the years have had when they read what Jesus is saying here. So let's kind of try to practically apply some of this. What does this mean if you are physically attacked, or do you just have to take it? Is that what he's saying here?
Yes.
Did you say yes and no?
I think you have a right to defend yourself.
Okay. Yeah, again, we're not talking about physical attacks here. It's really talking about insults. But let me say, that does not mean we are off the hook here. I worry about people who have an attitude. If I see somebody trying to get my stuff, I'm going to shoot them on the spot. We'll ask questions later. Do you think that obeys the spirit of what Jesus is talking about here? It absolutely does not. Now, that doesn't just stop us from defending our lives. I think we need to ask ourselves sometimes if our property is worth the life of someone else, okay? Just because the law allows you to do that doesn't mean that it's the right thing for you to do. And ultimately, this is about our attitudes. Think right now about your attitude toward a person who wrongs you. This is ultimately what this is about. People are going to wrong you. People are going to hurt you. You need to be prepared for that. But Jesus is forcing us to ask ourselves, what is my attitude going to be when someone wrongs me? What is my attitude going to be when someone insults me or attacks me? Am I going to react with retaliation, looking for an eye and tooth for a tooth? Am I shooting for revenge? Is that what I'm looking for? Or is my attitude going to be that I'm not going to fight fire with fire? Okay, that's the attitude that we ought to be thinking about. And so the danger of this for many people is they fear that this looks like weakness. Okay? Well, if I do this, I'm just going to get run over. I'm just going to be a somebody's stepping, their stepping stone or their doormat. I'm just going to get run over. Is that what this is? Is this weakness? No, it's not weakness. Let me ask you this. When somebody insults you, is it easier to insult them back or to keep your mouth shut?
Something back.
Yeah, that's the easy thing to do. So this principle that Jesus is calling us to is actually real strength, okay? It will require more strength of you than you've ever imagined to do what Jesus is saying here. The world may not recognize this as strength, at least initially. Just like you build a reputation for honesty, as we talked about, over time, you build a reputation for this kind of strength over time. So people may eventually see you as weak initially, but eventually they'll recognize a strength behind it, okay? And let me also say this. Just as one lie will make someone with a reputation for honesty not seem so honest anymore, what will slip it out of one time do for somebody who has a reputation for turning the other cheek? It's a lot easier to lose your reputation than to build it, okay? But what we're trying to build is not reputation, but character. And so when we mess up, we just start over and work on it again, okay? But what he is calling us to is to respond differently than the rest of the world when it comes to how we are wronged, okay? And so everybody in this room and everybody watching online, and even those who weren't able to make it here this morning, have people in their lives who have wronged them and do wrong them. And we're going to see this even more next week when Jesus starts talking about loving our enemies, okay? It's not going to get any better for y'all, okay? Not going to get any better for us. But I know that you are dealing with people who have wronged you. And the way you have responded is not the way that Jesus would have you respond. So what you need to be asking yourself, like this is supremely applicable to the lives of every person in this room right now, because every person's got those kind of people in their lives. And so what you need to ask yourself is, how am I going to apply this principle today and tomorrow when I go to work, tonight when I go home? How are we going to apply these principles? What are you going to do today to those people who have wronged you, who have offended you? How are you going to think differently about those people who have wronged you and have offended you? If you don't think about those issues now, if you're not working through those issues in your brain at this moment, what's going to happen when they come up? If you're not thinking through them right now, are you going to respond the way Jesus tells you to respond? No, because in the moment, what we're going to do?
Snap.
So we have to mentally, emotionally, and sometimes physically prepare ourselves. Okay, I'm going to work today, and when I get there, Joe's going to be there, and Joe's going to say that thing that he always says that makes me want to punch him. Okay? And if your person is named Joe, I'm sorry, I didn't know that, okay? But he's going to say that thing, and normally what I do is go right back at him, and the rest of the day, this is what we're doing. And so you're going to have to tell yourself, I know this is coming, and so right now I'm going to respond differently. Jesus compared to this when we respond to hatred with kindness. He compared it to dumping burning coals on someone's head. Like, it probably worked better. Like, you probably might even be more satisfied with the outcome than if you went back at them. But he's calling us to respond to insult, to respond to anger, to respond to hurt, to respond to pain with kindness and love. And the reason he's calling us to that is because that's what he's done for us. Okay? We were enemies of God. By our nature, we are people who have rejected God. And what did he do for us? Yeah, he sent his son to die for us. Okay? When we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Not when we were trying to get our act together. Jesus gave us a little boost up. It's not what he did. When we were sinners, Jesus died for us. When we were rejecting him, when we hated him, Jesus died for us. And so that's what he is calling us to today, okay? To have that same attitude toward those who wrong us, those who insult us, those who hurt us, to respond in the way that he responded, okay? All right, anybody want to add anything? Any questions, comments, concerns? All right. Hunter, you want to close us out?
Most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for today, Lord. Thank you so much for all the many blessings you've given us. Thank you so much for just watching over and just keeping us safe. Lord, I ask you to just be with us, Lord, as we go throughout the week, Lord, that Lord, people can see you in our lives, Lord, and Lord, they can see how much we really love you, and Lord, how you have blessed us. Lord, I just ask you to watch over the ones who are sick, Lord, that you could just heal them and comfort them. Lord, I ask you to just watch over our country. Lord, I just thank you for everyone that's come today, Lord, to hear the message, Lord, that they can take and apply to their lives. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. All right.